You might think that with the new year, England's property scene will look brighter, but sadly it doesn't. As we enter 2026, more than 165,000 children are waking up under a temporary roof. And when we look deeper, things are actually getting worse. Back in 2010, this number was around 50,000. And if we go even further back in time, it was much lower, which would have been great if we were still living in the 90s, right? But today, it's a huge problem, because these poor children's families simply can't afford an average home, and that brings countless difficulties. For a bit of empathy, let's imagine you wake up in a tiny room with your whole family. You have no privacy, the neighborhood isn't safe, there's poor hygiene, no stability, and most of the time, you're worrying about your children's safety. And believe me, this is only the tip of the iceberg. It's not an exaggeration at all. According to a report from the National Child Mortality Database, between 2019 and 2024, sadly 74 children passed away because of the poor living conditions in temporary accommodation. So, you might think, what really makes this people stay in these places? Why does everything about England's property market look so bad that it has come to this? The answer is obvious. Rent prices have risen so dramatically that even a working couple can barely afford a decent home to rent. According to the Office for National Statistics, average private rents in the UK reached £1,366 per month in November 2025, after a 4.4% annual increase. And to make you understand how bad it is, the average full-time worker in England earns around £2,500 to £2,800 net per month. For a single person, this means rent often takes over 50% of take-home pay in many cities. Even for a couple, both earning average wages, rent can consume 35 to 45% of their combined income, well above the recommended 30% affordability threshold. And after all of this, when you add essentials like food, utilities, transport, and council tax, what's left is barely enough for a decent quality of life. Savings, emergencies, leisure, or travel. For many households, it's simply not possible. And for decades, England was seen as one of the best places in the world to build a stable life. Maybe this sentence would have sounded right if we were living 20 years ago. But now even housing, which is a fundamental human right, has become unaffordable for millions of people. It's funny and sad at the same time how things can completely turn around in just 20 to 30 years. What once felt stable and secure now feels out of reach for ordinary working people. And we don't really want to imagine 30 years from now, because the statistics are not showing good signs for England's property scene, not for the future, and certainly not for future generations as well. Because if we look back in time, from 2005 to 2025, private rents have roughly doubled, over 100% increase, far outpacing wage growth, which rose only about 40 to 60% in the same period. Rents continue to climb faster than salaries year after year. The future of England's property market doesn't look good for the rental sector, and the same goes for house sales. Right now, an average property in England costs around £268,000, while in the late 1990s, it was around £60,000. That's over a 300% rise in house prices. And as we said, it has significantly outpaced wage growth, a deeply concerning trend that worsens each year. House prices continue to rise, leaving the middle class struggling to afford homeownership, with the affordability gap growing ever wider. If you were working in the late 1990s or early 2000s, you could comfortably buy a house with a favorable interest rate without committing your entire salary to mortgage payments. Back then, in 1999, the average house price was around £70,000 to £75,000, and the price-to-earnings ratio was about 4 times average income, making homes far more accessible for ordinary workers. Today, in 2025, average house prices stand at around £270,000 to £271,000, with the ratio now exceeding 8 times earnings. Wages have roughly doubled since the late 1990s, but house prices have more than tripled, squeezing many households out of the ownership market entirely. If we look deeper into the reasons behind this worsening trend, there are multiple factors, but one of the biggest is simply that supply can't keep up with demand. For decades, England has failed to build enough homes to match rapid population growth, migration, and changing household formations, like more single-person households and smaller families. In 2024 to 2025, net additional dwellings reached just 208,600, a 6% drop from the previous year. This falls far short of the estimated need, around 300,000 to 370,000 homes per year, to stabilize the market and tackle the backlog. Affordable and social housing delivery is even more limited, with only about 64,800 affordable homes completed in 2024 to 2025, well below the 90,000 to 145,000 required annually for lower-income families. This chronic undersupply keeps pushing rents and prices higher, trapping more families in unaffordable or unstable housing. So, the question is, will things actually get better? When we look at the government's actions and long-term plans, this question doesn't have a straightforward answer. In December 2025, the UK government announced a strategy called the National Plan to End Homelessness. Under this plan, the government pledged to invest over £3.5 billion, with the goal of reducing homelessness and improving living conditions for those in temporary accommodation. Alongside this, the government also announced a much larger commitment, £39 billion, aimed at building more than 300,000 new homes over a 10-year period, many of which are expected to be social or affordable housing. In theory, this should help increase supply and reduce pressure on the housing market. In addition to direct investment, a further £2.5 billion in low-interest credit has been allocated to support developers and housing projects, encouraging the construction of new properties across the country. On paper, these numbers sound significant. Billions are being promised, long-term plans are being laid out, and housing supply is finally being acknowledged as part of the problem. However, the real question remains whether these measures will be enough, and more importantly, whether they will arrive fast enough to help the people who are already struggling today. But one thing is certain: whether things get better or worse will ultimately be determined by the actions governments take, and how seriously they choose to protect and look after their citizens. The policies, investments, and decisions made today will shape the future of housing for entire generations. And while the challenges are huge, many still hope that meaningful change is possible. Now, we'd like to hear from you. Do you think the situation will improve? Have you or someone you know been affected by the housing crisis? Feel free to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for watching.